Today is my 57th town hall meeting. In the days in which there were only 69 of those each year, I would be almost done, but there are now 105 opportunities, and I am pleased that Congress, at least the Senate, is not in session today, and it gives me the opportunity to spend today and tomorrow, actually, in Wichita and El Dorado and Newton. And I appreciate the chance to have a conversation with each of you. I talked to your congressman last night on the phone, Mike Pompeo. The House is in session today, and he left this morning on a 6:15 flight to return to Washington, D.C., and he sends his greetings. He will be voting tonight on the legislation to extend the debt ceiling. There will be a House vote this evening, and so this process of one of the more important things that Congress is debating is beginning today in the House of Representatives. Before I begin any kind of, I have no formal remarks, but before I begin my remarks, I would like to just take a moment. Yesterday I was in Pittsburgh, Kansas, in which at the memorial, the Veterans Memorial there, and for those who, I know many attended ceremonies and services here in Wichita, but we especially have the challenge, the bad news of the young soldier, the sergeant from Bel Air, Thomas Bohall, and I would just ask for a moment of silence for a local boy who has ended whose life has ended way too prematurely. Thank you all very much. I assume that there are those skeptics who would think that town hall meetings perhaps are just a stage for the media and for some kind of image that Moran is out listening. But this aspect of my life, both personal and political, is real. It's something that determines how I think and who I am, how I vote. And so your presence and participation today is very valuable to me. For the 14 years that I represented the folks who lived in the 1st Congressional District, we conducted 69 town hall meetings every year, and we're almost to that 1,000th town hall meeting of my life as a public servant, or in less popular or less positive phrase, politician. And it does, I think that dose of common sense and good judgment that Kansans have is something that Washington, D.C. desperately needs. And while we're often, it seems, in my view, too often engaged in these political battles that Republicans trying to score points against Democrats and Democrats trying to score points against Republicans, something just that was based upon Kansas values, good judgment, common sense, those kind of solutions would be something very much of use to our country. We are delighted that we have the opportunity to serve the United States Senate, and I thank you all for that chance. And I will work hard to be worthy of the opportunity that Kansans have given me. My interest in public service began really as a person who believes that we live our lives in our state in a pretty special way, and I wanted to make certain that that way of life that we enjoy in Kansas, east to west, south to north, urban, suburban, and rural, is continued into the future. And therefore I have taken what I would call a very Chamber of Commerce perspective to Washington, D.C. It's about making sure that the business community has an opportunity to succeed, and in the process of success, put people to work. It's about trying to make certain that our educational system is not intruded upon by the federal government, and that our schools that in many instances do so well in Kansas don't have new impediments as a result of decisions made in Washington. It's trying to make sure our farmers and ranchers have a shot at success, trying to make certain that our health care delivery system in Kansas, again, a wide variety of opportunities for access to health care is something that's around for a while longer, ultimately with the goal of having our kids and grandkids make the decision that they can live and raise their families in a place called Kansas. And so from that point of view, it is very much what I would call a Chamber of Commerce perspective, a belief that we have a high quality of life in our state and that we have a responsibility to try to preserve and protect and enhance and pass it on to another generation of Kansans. Beyond that, and I think it's particularly true in our country's history today, I think there are significant overriding national issues. I think our country is financially broke. It's troublesome to say that, but I think the truth is that. And it means that if you are broke, you have to behave differently than you were behaving when you weren't broke. And I believe that is a responsibility that all of us have as American citizens. In fact, I would say to you that I think us as Americans, every one of us in this room, have the responsibility to pass on to the next generation of Americans the opportunity to pursue the American dream, no guarantees, but the chance for success, so however an individual defines that, and to make sure we live in a country that has liberty and freedom as guaranteed by our Constitution. These are serious times, and unfortunately I think that we've heard this our whole lives, and certainly I have. The politicians in Washington, D.C. talk about the turning point, the crossroads. These are difficult and challenging times. The decisions we make today are going to determine the future of our country. I've heard that my entire life. I don't know that I ever believed it, but I believe it today. I think these are different and unique times that require different behavior from our elected officials than we've seen in the past. And in fact, I was at least trying to convince my wife to get out, that we had to go live a normal life. Now, I know this is a conversation she and I had 2 years ago. It's like, let's get out of this stuff and go live that normal life. Now, I know none of us live normal lives. And my wife's immediate reaction was something I didn't understand, because she goes, "Oh, no, Jerry, you're good at what you do. The country needs you. This is your calling." And I thought, this doesn't sound like my wife at all. And then I realized she likes the fact that I'm home only on weekends. Perhaps more seriously, we watched our daughter walk across the graduation stage, and it occurred to me that we all have a responsibility, and certainly me as an elected official have a responsibility to make certain that that daughter and every other daughter and son walking across the graduation stage has the opportunity to pursue the American dream, and again, to live in a country with freedom and liberty. And I will work hard to be worthy of that kind of goal, in our country. In my view, we have for way too long spent too much money. I just think that's now a given. The good news is that there is a change in Washington, D.C., and the conversations generally between Republicans and Democrats both is not about how much more money we can spend, which has been the norm, but how much less money we are going to appropriate. And that is a bit of a turning point. We're not where we need to be, and I think we see evidence that the politics of Washington, D.C., that unfortunately, the opportunity presents itself for those who make what I would call courageous suggestions to be shot down by the politicians who want to portray panic among the voters, that bad things are going to happen if you follow this path. And whatever the right answers are to those challenging problems, we ought not be shooting down those who are taking the step to outline how serious the challenges are. And in my view, the everything is on the table point of view, I suppose with a couple of exceptions, and that is that I can't imagine voting for anything that would increase the security risk to our servicemen and women or fail to meet the commitment of those who have served our country in the military. But beyond that, I think we're going to have to have less spending in every broad category. We ought to get back to an appropriations process. There has not been a budget passed in the last 2 years by Congress. That's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to be a member of Congress in which one of the fundamental responsibilities of a Congress is to pass a budget and then pass appropriation bills that fill in the blanks with that budget. And yet that has not been done, and therefore you see these continuing resolutions that fund government for very short periods of time, in which you can't expect there to be any efficiency, you can't do any planning, and we don't have the opportunity to do the oversight that would suggest that here's a program that we can eliminate, or here's a program that perhaps deserves our support. And that process doesn't occur because the budget and appropriations process has not been followed now for 2 years. There's a possibility, it seems to me, that we're moving in the direction that the Senate will begin an appropriation process, and right now we're negotiating the top line, how much money will be spent. So I would say that the challenges we face are great, but I'm an optimist and believe that we have a great opportunity to turn the country around. That it's no fun to talk about cutting spending. Almost anything you talk about reducing spending on has its supporters. And if we go down this path, people will tell me why their program is different, why this is an investment, not an expenditure. And those are not fun conversations. I have asked in every town hall meeting now for the 57th time of my constituents, we need to make certain we're at the point in which we reward our elected officials who say no to spending as compared to those who say yes. And I generally think the American people are ahead of their elected officials. But for too long, how you got elected and reelected was in promising to bring home more things. 42% of the amount of money we spend in Washington, D.C. is borrowed. We are not immune from the economic forces in this world. If we don't resolve this ourselves, at some point in time, the world economy will resolve it for us. We are not different than what's happening in Ireland or Portugal, in Greece. At some point in time, those who lend us money will conclude we're no longer credit worthy. First of all, interest rates will rise. And then secondly, they decide they're not loaning us money at all. And we've seen the wake-up call by what Standard & Poor's has indicated. We're, in a sense, on a watch list now for whether or not our debt securities will be continued to be top-rated. It does seem to me that there's a more fun side or a more enjoyable side to this issue of balancing the books, and that's growing the economy. We absolutely have the opportunity to, in a sense, bring in more tax revenues as more people get the opportunity to work. And so we need to create a regulatory and tax environment in which there's a chance for business to succeed. How you get out of the recession that we're in is that small businessmen and women, entrepreneurs, decide now is the time to invest, to buy a piece of equipment, to hire a new employee. And we don't live in a time in which there's much certainty about the desirability of doing that, the profitability of doing that. I walk through lots of plants, manufacturers, small manufacturers dot our state. The most common conversation I have with a plant owner is, what next is government going to do that puts me out of business? I had my town hall meeting in Scott City. Every conversation, it seemed, was about the Environmental Protection Agency, whether it was a rancher, whether it was a farmer, whether it was the local generator of electricity, the Rural Electric Cooperative, or whether it was the business person on Main Street. It was, what next is the EPA going to do that reduces the chances that we have a success? We ought to be promoting the pursuit of the creation of wealth. We ought to be encouraging it, not discouraging it, because as people pursue wealth, the side benefit, in fact, perhaps the main benefit, is that they employ people, and we have the chance to feed our families and to take care of our kids, plan for our own retirement, and save for the kids' education. Those are good things. And so the regulatory and tax environment, it was bothersome to me, discouraging to me that although we got an agreement on extending the tax code, that the longest period of time we could extend the tax code for was for 2 years. What business person or individual can make long-term decisions based upon not knowing what the tax code is going to be 2 years from now? The estate tax was the same way. For years now, Kansans have visited with me about the consequences of an estate tax to a small business person, a rancher, a farmer, and yet the solution was that the rates were lowered, a good thing, but for 2 years. We were telling folks before, you need to die in 2010. That was about as good as a financial planner could suggest. Now we've expanded it. You can die in 2011 or 2012. But we don't know anything more than that. And we need long-term policies that allow people to make decisions for their well-being. We also need a banking environment. Access to credit is a huge concern. I worry that the increasing regulations that we're going to see the demise of community banking and your ability to go to your hometown bank and borrow money for your business, for your farm, is diminishing. And I suppose it would be okay if that was happening as a result of the laws of economics, economies of scale. But the reason that it's happening is because we have become so regulated that the ability to cover the cost means that, and in fact, it means it makes it very difficult to stay in business. But the second part of that is that we have the inability to make those loans at all. I've talked to a dozen bankers who tell me they no longer make home loans in their hometown because the regulations are so scary that if they make a mistake, they're worried about the bottom line, the regulatory solvency of their bank. I sometimes think that this has got to appear, we've all grown up with the bank down the street. And therefore, this can't be a legitimate concern. But I think of times and time again of industries that no longer are with us because government regulated them out of business. I remember a conversation with your former Congressman, Secretary Glickman, in which he was lamenting the fact that there were so few meat packers in the country. There's 3 major packers, one of them headquartered here in Wichita with Cargill. He was lamenting lack of competition, and my response to the secretary was, it was your regulations, food safety regulations, that put so many businesses out of business. Many of us grew up in towns in which there was a meat locker plant. Your meat was processed at home. None of them could survive the new regulations, and they don't exist anymore. And I'm worried that we're headed in the same path for financial institutions, which will have a dramatic consequence upon our economy. We need certainty. We need access to credit. We need to make sure we have a regulatory and tax environment in which we can grow and prosper. Let me just mention a couple things specific to Wichita, talk a bit about the debt ceiling, and then take your questions and comments. I just came from McConnell, and this is my 3rd visit to McConnell this year. We are working hard to pay attention to issues that matter to Wichita. My first meeting just within the week after November's election was here, a round table with the aviation industry, trying to make certain that we make good policy decisions in Washington, D.C. The Senate has now passed the FAA reauthorization bill, which will be a good development for general aviation. I was here for the rally, which was a great event in my view, and we're still recovering from President Obama and others' comments about the luxury of owning a general aviation aircraft. Words matter in today's world, and it was good for the Secretary of Transportation to come visit the general aviation industry. I would tell you that while I'm supportive of accelerated depreciation, for example, tax incentives to get people to buy airplanes, in my view, what it takes is a growing economy in which a business person has the belief that it's a good time to invest in an airplane for the benefit of his or her business. And so while we can talk about kind of specific things that might be of benefit to a specific industry, what we desperately need is a great economy in which people have the confidence that they should be investing in the future of their company. Educational opportunities in Wichita. We've spent significant time with Wichita State. We want to grow that relationship. The research that's being done, in my view, there is a role for the federal government in investing in research, and a lot of that is and can take place at Wichita State University. Today, when I leave here, I'm visiting Via Christi, talking about health care. We'll be at UCI Construction, talking about their business here in Wichita, at Yingling Aviation later this afternoon. Again, trying to make sure that I'm fully connected. Education, I would say, is not a federal issue. It should, at least in my view, shouldn't be. And one of the things we work on is trying to get the federal government. As we face challenging times in Kansas to fund our schools, and if I'm in St. Francis, they're talking to me about, what are you doing, Senator, to make sure our school doors remain open? If I'm in Blue Valley in Johnson County, they're talking to me about, what are you doing to make sure we have high-quality schools here? The answer is the same. We ought to get the federal government out of the rules and regulations, the mandates that we place upon schools across our state, and let local boards of education, parents, and teachers make decisions about the well-being of their children. The most recent example of that is No Child Left Behind, which I think is a terrible intrusion in the quality of education that we have in the state, and moving us. Well, nice to know that's an applause line. Incidentally, I voted against No Child Left Behind. A hard bill to vote against. It passed overwhelmingly, and it's got a great title. It's not that I want to leave children behind, but the consequences of No Child Left Behind are dramatic in my view in the classroom. Our kids went to school at Hayes, and I remember our daughter's advanced history class was eliminated because it's not on the test. We make stupid decisions because we're trying to comply with some federal legislation. I worry a lot about, my wife plays the piano at the high school in Hayes, and she would tell me the importance of fine arts and music. Because she's my wife, I say, yes, I agree. And it's not on the test, so it gets less focus. I worry a lot about vocational education. Here in Wichita and across Kansas, our ability to educate students, their hands and their minds, is important, and yet vocational education is not on the test, therefore it receives less support, less focus. Those are decisions that local boards of education, parents and teachers ought to be making, and perhaps the most damaging thing about No Child Left Behind is that we're turning our teachers into bureaucrats as compared to educators. The joy of teaching is a classroom experience in which you watch a student learn something. It happens whenever a student is in the classroom with a teacher who loves to teach, with a student who wants to learn, and a mom and dad who say this is important. And if teaching becomes in service teachers' meetings, tests, and assessments, we lose something that's very important. You ask somebody who made a difference in their life, no one has yet to say my senator or my congressman. I can't even get my own kids to say that. It is much more about that classroom teacher. And so that is an example of where the federal government is causing us harm in a significant way. Finally, let me talk about the debt ceiling and then take your questions and comments. I indicated to President Obama more than a month ago, I would guess 6 weeks ago, that I have no intention of voting to raise the debt ceiling. And there may be some of you in this room who will say that's an irresponsible position. In my view, the president has provided no leadership. His budget doesn't move us in a balanced budget way. He has not adopted a single recommendation of his debt reduction commission. And he is going on as if life is the same as it was, as if we had money. And I would argue that it is more irresponsible to continue down the same path that we have gone on for a long time, in which spending is the way to our economic success. We've seen that theory. We've seen it certainly prevalent in the last 2 years. I'm not here in a very partisan way. I will tell you, Republicans, when we had the majority, we spent too much money, borrowed too much money, and grew government in size and scope in ways that should never have happened. What has happened in the last couple of years is exponentially more, but the end result is where we are today, that desperately needs a different direction. I've not had a response to my letter from the president. I accompanied other Republican members of the Senate to the White House. Many of us made the same kind of suggestions to the president, although it was a very cordial meeting. I didn't detect that there was any movement on the part of the administration in recognizing the seriousness of what we face. We have, and when people tell me it's irresponsible, we have voted 13 times in the time I've been in Congress on whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. And in fact, we've done that 11 times in the last decade. If that's responsibility, I want nothing to do with it. The responsibility comes, again, in saying we can't afford to do this, and if we don't use the debt ceiling as the moment of leverage, we will raise the debt ceiling one more time and 13 more times in the future. We'll just pass the buck. We'll kick the can down the road for somebody else to address this problem. And in my view, it's not one or the other. We can take care of the debt ceiling issue if we just can force folks to take care of the spending issue. And we ought to be doing both. We ought not default on our commitments. We ought not, and we don't have to, but we certainly ought to use this moment in time in which we decide that we're not just going to continue the same path that led to the irresponsible spending that causes us to have an economy that can't grow. 90% of our gross national product is equal to our debt. Every study that I've read demonstrates that when that happens, your economy slows, falters, and in fact the numbers suggest that you lose 1 million jobs annually when your debt is so large. So these are serious and important times. I'm always an optimist, and I think we have the ability. I have great faith in the American people, and I think we have a chance to make sure that good things happen in our country, not just for ourselves, but for future generations of Kansans and Americans. The good life is yet to come.